Welcome back to Beyond the Script. Today's episode, we are going to dive into the principles of duality, right? So, this is something that has been coming up quite a bit in recent conversations that I've been having. It's been coming up in my journaling. It's been a key theme this last week. And so, I really wanted to touch on this idea of duality, of how two things can be opposite and at the same time are still connected, two truths, if you will. So, we're going to unpack those principles today. We're going to unpack what it means, how it shows up in spiritual law, and how you can use it as a tool for growth as a tool for growth in business and in life. I should cut that out, but I'm not going to. I usually do these podcasts in one take, just so you know. So when you hear me stutter or anything, that's just real life. So, diving into duality, what is duality? In simple definition, it is the coexistence of opposites. So light and dark is duality. They're opposites, masculine and feminine, expansion and contraction, right? One cannot exist without the other. So when you think of you have a coin, you have heads on one side and tails on the other. They are opposite, however, they are connected via the coin, right? They're on the same coin. And so duality will help us make sense of our experiences because we understand joy by feeling pain. We know it's hot because we have felt cold, right? You can't have one without the other. We know it's dark because we have seen light. And so when you get this into spiritual law, the law of polarity, for example, everything has its opposite. And I had made a video earlier this week about the law of polarity where I showed a pen and how the pen, has its one side, the tip, and the other side, which is like the head of the pen, or if you're looking at a pen, it's eraser or whatever, right? Let's use a pencil. So a pencil, the tip on one side writes and the other side erases, opposites, right? And so, but the law of polarity, they're still connected. It's still all connected to the same pencil. And this then ties into the law of divine oneness. So everything has its opposite, but at the same time, everything is interconnected. You cannot have one without the other, right? You cannot erase mistakes via the pencil if you never wrote on the paper. Okay. So everything needs to exist, right? When we tie in like the law of rhythm, seasons, cycles, expansions, and things like this, then we see ebbs and flows, we see peaks and valleys within our life, within our business. And so when duality steps in as okay, because we're in a low point right now, the high point is coming. Because we've experienced low, then we have to also experience a high, right? And then on the flip side of this right here gives people anxiety sometimes because when things are going very good, then they're like, oh, well, there has to be a dip. But when you over analyze and overthink like, oh my God, the dip is coming, things are going way too good, it's gonna all fall apart and crumble, well, then you're not enjoying the peaks. You're not enjoying the good part. You're only stressed about the valley. And the valley coming is inevitable. It is absolutely at some point going to dip because you can't live life, you can't run a business on only experiencing the highs. You have to have the lows. If you don't have the lows, you will never appreciate the highs, right? This is what duality says. This is what the principles are. Two things can be true. I am going through a hard time right now, and I'm grateful for the lessons I'm learning, and I know it won't last forever, right? You can be absolutely going through it and feeling like, damn, this sucks. I feel terrible. I don't want to experience this anymore, and still be able to express gratitude that it's happening because you know that you're learning something. You know that it's teaching you something. And I feel like a lot of people miss that mark, that two truths can coexist when the truths are a little bit conflicting, right? I don't want to get all like political on here. But like one example of, let's scratch that. We'll go the more religious route. One example of two truths coexisting would be like, I believe in God and I don't believe in religion. Some people find a very hard time like grasping that. Sometimes it's very tricky to, for people to be like, to understand that. But that is a little bit of a duality, two truths coexisting. Um, since I already brought up political, let's just go ahead and do it. You can be like, I support the Second Amendment and I still believe there needs to be some type of reform, right? Two truths can coexist. And so, and these are, for some people, these are opposites. For some people, they're not. For some people, it's not two sides of the same coin. For some people, it's they're in the same realm, right? This goes into then perception, how you perceive things to be true, what you perceive things to be true, what your perception is on certain things, right? And so when we look at it like that, and then we get into the law of divine oneness, well, now that we're talking about perception, the law of divine oneness states that everyone is interconnected. Every single person is connected in some way, shape, or form, right? On a spiritual level, everybody has connection. This is also kind of mentioned biblically as well. But when we have that law of divine oneness, we have a hard time accepting that everybody is connected, because there are people who we just don't like. There are people we do not vibe with. There are people who we feel are just like so far fetched and opposite of anything we would ever want to be. But the irony in that is the qualities that you dislike in somebody else. What I have come to realize, at least for me, is like some of the qualities that I dislike about other people are some of the shadow qualities that I have, right? Um, or it's some of, like, what's a better way to put this? Yes, sometimes it's a shadow quality, but other times it is something, it's something so far-fetched, like I would never ever do that, right? I would never behave like that, which then bringing it back to duality, you see somebody acting in a way that you would never behave. That is an opposite of you, right? But this is why we're all connected through the law of divine oneness. The opposite still has to exist. Like I mentioned, the pencil, right? One side is going to write and the other side is going to erase, but they still are connected. They have to exist, to some caliber, to some degree together. And so in the law of polarity, when we look at people and we're like, oh my God, I could never be like that. I could never do that. And it's like with, like disgust or distaste or, any of that. The thing of it is, it still has to exist because it's an opposite. Okay. It's an opposite. So, not to get off on that tangent, but here's some more examples of duality in daily life. Let's look at motherhood. Joy versus exhaustion. Okay. You can, I know I do, love your children, right? They bring you so much joy, the most immense joy you've ever. And at the same time, you are exhausted. You want a break, right? Motherhood is full of dualities. I talk to friends and even myself, the saying of like, dang, I could use a little break from my kids. I could use a break to go do something. And you get your break. And then you spend that break like, damn, I miss my kids. Like I want to hang out with them. I want to see my children, right? And so that's a prime example of like duality at play is, this wanting this freedom back, wanting this little bit of freedom and, to just go and let live. And at the same time, like missing our children the moment that we do, having that experience and being like, actually, I want to go back home or I want to go see my children. And this is not every time. I have had trips where I'm like, actually I really needed this. But for the most part, like at some point I'm like, dang, like I want to go back into mom mode, right? And then you get into mom mode and you're like, wow, this is really challenging. I want to go back into freedom mode, right? So anyway, so that's an example of, duality in a daily life. If we look at entrepreneurship, we look at the duality of the freedom versus the responsibility. And so, we get into entrepreneurship for this idea of freedom and time freedom and financial freedom and all these different types of freedoms, right? And at the same time, on the other side of that freedom is the responsibility that we have to, build it up first before we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. We have to essentially give up freedom for a little bit of time where we put our head down and we're working harder than normal, and we're getting these things off the ground and we're getting things up and running, and we just have to like say no to certain things. But then on the opposite end of that, the freedom then comes later. And under the law of polarity, using my pencil example, it's like you're just sliding across the pole, right? You're sliding down the pencil to get to the other side. So when it comes to duality and seeing two things to be true at the same time, my question to you, or I'll leave you with some journaling prompts, is this: where am I rejecting one side of my experience? So when you are thinking about your certain life experiences, your business growth, whatever it is that you're dealing with right now, and everything has an opposite, where are you essentially rejecting that opposite? And in the rejection of that opposite, what is the opposite trying to teach you? What is it trying to teach you about yourself, right? And this can be, like I said, either something that you're going through personally. This can be something that you're going through as a part of a collective, meaning, the people around you are helping you to see certain opposites. And you're like, dang, what is this really trying to teach me? Like, what am I supposed to learn right now? Because if everything is interconnected via the universal laws, then there is, not to say that there are no accidents, but everything is like, it sounds so dramatic to say everything is like a lesson. I don't mean to like overanalyze your life, but what I mean is like everything is a teaching opportunity. That's what I'm trying to get at. Everything can teach something. Everything can, help you learn something about yourself. So ask yourself that question, grab a pen, grab a piece of paper. If you listen to my episodes, you know what I'm about to say. I'm about to say, set a timer for 10 minutes, get nice and relaxed, and just write for 10 minutes. Let it all free flow out and see where the lesson ties in. See in this journal entry, like where you have your own oppositions, where you're, operating under the law of polarity as an individual, where the law of polarity is coming to play in your role as a part of the collective, right? There's all these different ways that it ties in. And I really wanted to touch on that this week, on the dualities and the polarity and stuff, because I've just seen a lot of it around conversations that I've had with people, and in conversations where I'm in complete agreement with somebody and where I'm in complete disagreement with somebody. And even the disagreement is there to teach you something, because it's connected to you at a different end, right? And I won't lie. Some of these spiritual laws I'm still learning to grasp the concept of. And the law of polarity is actually one of them. I understand it from the point that I described earlier, which is, that everything has its opposite, including like my behaviors have an opposite of somebody else out in the world who's just completely opposite of me, right? And we both have to exist, even if I 100% disagree, because that's what the law of polarity is. But and so that one, like, when I look at it that way, it makes sense. When I look at it from the perspective of a pencil or a pole having two sides or anything like that, then yeah, of course it makes sense. But the human mind, if you're listening to this episode and you're like, she sounds nuts, or I don't get it, or I don't agree with it, the human mind is still going to try to make sense of things in a way that it can comprehend from like an ego place, right? Whereas the spiritual body understands this. And so the more in tune we become with the spiritual body, the more these spiritual laws begin to make sense. I remember the first time somebody told me about the law of divine oneness, I was like, absolutely not. You're not going to convince me of that, right? And then I took some time, to meditate on it and to really like deep dive into it. And it started to make more sense. Like, of course, we're all connected to some degree, right? Even and I've said it so many times this episode, but even in the opposites, like we're still connected to some degree because we have to be. We're all here for a purpose. So that is today's episode. I hope that makes sense for everybody. A little bit all over the place, but yeah, dualities. So to recap, two things can be true at the same time, even if they are conflicting. Um, you know, and that's okay. That's completely okay. And one last example I'll leave is like, think about when you're leaving from vacation, right? And you're sad you're leaving from vacation, and at the same time you're excited to go home. You're like, I want my vacation to continue to go on, and I want to get back to normal life, right? That's a duality at play. That's the perfect example of a duality at play. Like, two things can be true at the same time, even though they're conflicting. I want to stay and I want to leave. That's a conflict. Those are conflicting thoughts, but they can both also be true. So that's really the key point of today's episode, is that two things can be true at the same time. Everybody is interconnected, whether we want to believe it or not. And yeah, that is what I have for you today. If you liked this episode, please feel free to share it with a friend. If you listened, tag me on Instagram. Instagram is @_the Nikki Lynn. And my TikTok is back up. My TikTok is @it's Nikki Lynn. So until next week, everybody have a blessed week, and I will drop the next episode next Tuesday. Bye now.